The explosion that would change everything happened at exactly 0347 hours. But the story really begins 3 weeks earlier, when Sergeant Elena Vasquez stepped off the transport helicopter at Forward Operating Base Sentinel. Her combat medic bag slung over one shoulder and a camera crew following behind her. The base commander, Colonel Harrison Burke, had made it crystal clear in his pre-arrival briefing that she was there for one reason only: to be the photogenic face of the military's new diversity initiative. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What he didn't know was that Elena had graduated top of her class from the Army's most elite medical training program, spoke 4 languages fluently, and had skills that would soon prove invaluable in ways no one could have predicted. The desert heat hit Elena like a physical wall as she stepped onto the landing pad. The rotor wash from the departing Chinook helicopter, kicking up clouds of fine sand that infiltrated every piece of equipment despite the protective covers. Forward Operating Base Sentinel stretched out before her like a small city dropped into the middle of nowhere, a collection of reinforced structures, vehicle depots, and defensive positions carved out of the unforgiving landscape of eastern Afghanistan. The base housed nearly 800 personnel from multiple NATO countries, serving as a critical logistics hub for operations throughout the region. Elena adjusted the straps of her medical kit, a custom-configured bag that contained equipment most field medics never even saw during training. The weight was familiar, comforting even, though she knew the next few hours would determine whether anyone at this base would take her seriously or simply see her as the political statement the Pentagon had intended her to be at 26. She was younger than most of the sergeants on base, and her compact frame and careful attention to regulation appearance often led people to underestimate both her capabilities and her determination. The reception committee waiting for her consisted of 3 officers, whose body language immediately communicated their collective skepticism about her presence. Major Rebecca Torres, the base operations officer, stood with military precision, but her expression suggested she was calculating how much of her valuable time this photo opportunity would consume. Captain James Mitchell, the senior medical officer, appeared more curious than dismissive, though his arms remained crossed as he studied Elena with the analytical gaze of someone trying to determine her actual qualifications. Behind them stood Master Sergeant Derek Sullivan, the senior enlisted medic, whose weathered face showed the kind of professional wariness that came from years of working with replacements, who talked more than they performed. "Sergeant Vasquez," Major Torres said, stepping forward with a crisp salute that Elena returned with equal precision. "Welcome to FOB Sentinel. I trust your flight from Bagram was comfortable enough." The question carried undertones that Elena recognized immediately. Most personnel arrived at forward bases on crowded transport flights with minimal amenities, sleeping on cargo netting alongside equipment and supplies. Elena's arrival on a dedicated helicopter with a media escort suggested special treatment. That would immediately mark her as different from the standard rotation of soldiers who earned their way to combat assignments through conventional channels. "Thank you, ma'am," Elena replied, her voice carrying just enough firmness to suggest she understood the subtext. "I'm ready to integrate with your medical team and contribute to the mission here." Captain Mitchell stepped forward, consulting a tablet that Elena assumed contained her official assignment orders. "According to the briefing I received from Brigade Headquarters, you'll be embedded with our medical unit for a 2-week documentation period. The media team will be recording your daily activities to highlight the roles of female soldiers in combat support positions." Elena nodded, though internally she felt the familiar frustration that had followed her throughout her military career. The emphasis on documentation and media coverage inevitably overshadowed any discussion of her actual medical capabilities or operational experience. She had learned early in her service that fighting against these characterizations often made them worse, so she had developed a strategy of letting her performance speak louder than any protest about her treatment. Master Sergeant Sullivan approached with the measured pace of someone who had seen countless new arrivals and had developed reliable methods for quickly assessing their potential value to his team. His inspection was thorough but not hostile, taking in everything from the way Elena wore her equipment to the condition of her boots. She stood still under his examination, understanding that this moment would largely determine her working relationship with the enlisted medical personnel, who would either accept her as a colleague or dismiss her as a publicity stunt. "Interest in gear configuration," Sullivan observed, noting the specialized medical equipment visible in Elena's kit. "Most field medics carry standard issue supplies. You've got some items I don't recognize." This was Elena's first opportunity to demonstrate that her presence at the base involved more than photogenic appearances. She unzipped the main compartment of her medical bag, revealing equipment that drew immediate attention from both Sullivan and Captain Mitchell. Advanced trauma supplies, specialized monitoring devices, and pharmaceutical preparations that exceeded the standard field medic inventory by significant margins. "I completed additional medical training at the Special Operations Medical course," Elena explained, watching their expressions shift from skepticism to interest. "The equipment reflects advanced trauma care capabilities, including some experimental treatments for combat injuries." Captain Mitchell leaned closer, his professional curiosity overriding his initial reservations about her assignment. SOMC graduates usually get assigned to Special Forces units or Ranger battalions. How did you end up in a documentation assignment at a conventional base? The question touched on the complicated politics behind Elena's current posting, involving decisions made at levels far above the base command structure. She had requested combat assignment multiple times, only to be redirected into roles that emphasized her value as a representative of military diversity rather than her medical expertise. The irony wasn't lost on her that her exceptional qualifications had become almost irrelevant compared to her symbolic importance. Sometimes the needs of the service take unexpected directions, Elena replied diplomatically, recognizing that discussing the political aspects of her assignment would serve no productive purpose. "I'm here to contribute however I can to your medical operations." Major Torres checked her watch with the efficient gesture of someone managing multiple competing priorities. "The media team will want to begin recording this afternoon, focusing on your integration with the medical staff. Captain Mitchell will brief you on our current patient load and operational procedures." As the initial reception concluded and the officers dispersed to their respective duties, Elena found herself alone with Master Sergeant Sullivan, who had continued to study her equipment with professional interest. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." The base around them hummed with the constant activity of a forward operating position, vehicles moving between facilities, personnel conducting maintenance on equipment, and the distant sound of helicopters providing transportation to outlying positions. "You know," Sullivan said, his tone shifting to something more conversational, "most of the media assignments we get here are pretty straightforward. Soldiers doing their jobs, maybe some interviews about morale and mission accomplishment. Having someone with your level of medical training for a documentation project seems like overkill." Elena appreciated his directness and decided to respond with equal honesty. "Between you and me, Sergeant, I think there might be more to this assignment than the official briefing suggested. Advanced medical training doesn't usually get wasted on public relations projects." Sullivan nodded thoughtfully, then gestured toward the medical facility. "Well, whatever the real reason you're here, we can use the help. This base supports operations across a pretty wide area, and we see everything from routine injuries to serious trauma cases. If you've got the skills they say you do, there'll be plenty of opportunities to use them." The medical facility at FOB Sentinel was more substantial than Elena had expected, reflecting the base's role as a regional hub for multiple smaller outposts. The main treatment area could handle up to 8 patients simultaneously, with equipment ranging from basic first aid supplies to sophisticated diagnostic and surgical capabilities. Adjacent rooms contain pharmacy storage, equipment maintenance areas, and recovery spaces for patients requiring extended observation before evacuation to larger medical facilities. Captain Mitchell introduced Elena to the medical team with professional courtesy that seemed genuine despite the unusual circumstances of her assignment. The team consisted of 2 other medics, Specialist Rodriguez and Corporal Thompson, along with a physician assistant and a nurse practitioner, who rotated between Sentinel and 2 smaller bases in the region. Each team member had developed specialized skills based on the types of cases they encountered most frequently, from combat trauma to the various health issues that arose from extended deployment in harsh environmental conditions. Our typical patient load runs about 15 to 20 cases per day, Captain Mitchell explained as they toured the facility. Most are minor injuries, equipment accidents, or routine medical issues. But we also serve as the primary trauma center for any serious casualties from the smaller outposts in our sector. Elena noted the efficiency of the facility's layout and the quality of the medical equipment, much of which was newer and more advanced than she had seen at other forward bases. The setup suggested that FOB Sentinel's medical mission involved more than standard garrison healthcare, though the specific reasons for the enhanced capabilities weren't immediately apparent. Specialist Rodriguez, a veteran medic with 2 previous deployments, showed Elena the supply storage areas and explained the procedures for requesting additional equipment or pharmaceuticals. His manner was friendly but professional, treating her as a colleague rather than a visiting dignitary. Elena appreciated the normalcy of discussing medical protocols and supply chain logistics instead of being asked about her experiences as a female soldier or her thoughts on military diversity initiatives. "The thing about this base," Rodriguez explained as they organized medical supplies, "is that we never know what's coming through those doors. Yesterday, we treated a contractor for a dislocated shoulder. Today it might be a convoy that hit an IED. The variety keeps us sharp, but it also means we need to be ready for anything." Elena understood the challenge he described. Forward medical facilities required teams that could transition seamlessly between routine healthcare and emergency trauma response, often with little warning about the severity or complexity of incoming cases. Her advanced training had prepared her for exactly these types of environments, though she suspected that the base command still viewed her primarily as a temporary visitor rather than a functioning member of the medical team. The afternoon brought Elena's first encounter with the media crew that would be documenting her assignment. The team consisted of a print journalist, a photographer, and a video specialist, all of whom approached their work with professional competence while clearly understanding the political sensitivities surrounding military diversity initiatives. Their questions focused on her background, her motivations for military service, and her perspectives on the opportunities available to women in combat support roles. Elena answered their questions thoughtfully, recognizing that her responses would likely be edited and shaped to support whatever narrative the military's public affairs office wanted to promote. She had learned through previous media interactions that the most effective approach was to focus on her dedication to the mission and her commitment to providing excellent medical care to fellow service members, rather than trying to address broader political questions about gender integration in the military. "What drew you to military medicine?" asked the journalist, a middle-aged civilian contractor whose previous work had included embedded reporting from several combat zones. "The opportunity to make a direct difference in people's lives during their most challenging moments," Elena replied, the answer reflecting her genuine motivation while avoiding the more complex personal and professional factors that had shaped her career path. Military medicine combines technical expertise with the mission focus that defines our service. Every day, we have the chance to ensure that our fellow soldiers receive the best possible care when they need it most. The photographer captured images of Elena working alongside the other medics, reviewing medical protocols and organizing equipment. The video specialist recorded her explaining various medical procedures and discussing the importance of advanced trauma care in combat environments. Throughout the documentation process, Elena remained conscious that her words and actions were being shaped into a story that would extend far beyond her actual assignment at FOB Sentinel. As the first day concluded, Elena found herself in the temporary quarters assigned to her for the duration of her stay. The accommodations were standard for forward operating bases, a small space with basic furnishings, shared bathroom facilities, and minimal privacy. The walls were thin enough that conversations from adjacent rooms provided a constant background soundtrack of military life, discussions of missions, equipment problems, and the thousand small details that occupied soldiers' attention during deployment. Elena used the quiet time to review the medical protocols specific to FOB Sentinel and study the facility's equipment inventory more thoroughly. Her training had taught her that understanding the available resources and established procedures was essential to effective medical response, particularly in environments where backup support might be hours away. The base's medical capabilities were impressive, but she also noted some gaps in equipment and supplies that could become critical factors if the facility faced a serious mass casualty situation. Her secure satellite phone buzzed with a message from her previous commanding officer, Colonel Sarah Williams, who had been instrumental in Elena's advanced medical training and had advocated unsuccessfully for her assignment to a special operations unit. The message was brief but meaningful. Make the most of whatever opportunities present themselves. Your skills will be needed sooner than anyone expects. Elena stared at the message for several minutes, wondering if Colonel Williams had information about her assignment that hadn't been included in the official briefings. The suggestion that her skills would be needed implied that the documentation project might be a cover for something more substantial, though Elena couldn't determine what that might be based on her observations during the first day. The next morning brought Elena's first real test as a member of the medical team when a convoy from one of the smaller outposts arrived with 3 soldiers who had been injured in a vehicle rollover accident. The injuries were serious but not life-threatening: a dislocated shoulder, a probable concussion, and multiple lacerations from broken glass. The incident provided Elena with her first opportunity to demonstrate her medical capabilities in a real-world situation rather than a training exercise or media documentation. Captain Mitchell observed as Elena worked with the injured soldiers, noting her systematic approach to trauma assessment and her confident use of the facility's equipment. Her interactions with the patients reflected both technical competence and the kind of calm reassurance that helped reduce anxiety and pain during medical treatment. Within an hour, all 3 soldiers had been stabilized, treated, and prepared for evacuation to a larger medical facility for follow-up care. Impressive work, Captain Mitchell commented after the patients had been transferred to the evacuation helicopter. Your assessment protocols are more thorough than standard field medicine, and you handled the concussion evaluation particularly well. Elena appreciated the professional recognition, though she remained aware that the media crew had documented the entire incident as part of their coverage of her assignment. The treatment of real casualties would undoubtedly become a central element of whatever story they produced about female soldiers in combat support roles, regardless of whether her gender had any relevance to her medical performance. Master Sergeant Sullivan approached as Elena was cleaning and restocking her medical equipment, a routine that she had learned to perform immediately after every patient encounter to ensure readiness for the next emergency. His expression suggested that he had been reassessing his initial impressions of her capabilities and assignment. That was solid medical work, Sullivan said, his tone conveying respect that hadn't been present during their first meeting. The way you handled the concussion protocols and coordinated with the evacuation team showed real experience, not just classroom training. Elena nodded, recognizing that earning the respect of experienced enlisted personnel was often more valuable than impressing officers when it came to effective team integration. Thank you, Sergeant. I've been fortunate to work with some excellent instructors who emphasize the importance of systematic approaches to trauma care. Sullivan studied her for a moment, then lowered his voice slightly. Can I ask you something? Off the record, no media documentation. What's your read on why someone with your qualifications got assigned to a public relations project? The question reflected the same suspicions that Elena had been developing about her assignment. Her level of medical training and the specialized equipment she had been authorized to bring exceeded what would be necessary for standard documentation of military medical operations. Combined with Colonel Williams's cryptic message about her skills being needed, the assignment seemed to involve factors that hadn't been explained in her official briefings. Honestly, Elena replied, matching his discretion about speaking away from the media crew, I think there might be aspects of this assignment that we haven't been told about yet. Advanced trauma training doesn't usually get wasted on photo opportunities. Sullivan nodded thoughtfully. That matches my assessment. This base has been getting some unusual supply deliveries lately, and there's been an increase in classified communications traffic. Something's happening that requires capabilities beyond our normal mission profile. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a helicopter that Elena didn't recognize from the standard aircraft that served the base. The aircraft bore minimal markings and was configured for rapid personnel transport rather than cargo or medical evacuation. As it landed, Elena noticed that Major Torres and several other senior officers moved toward the landing area with the kind of purposeful urgency that suggested an important arrival. Elena watched from the medical facility as two figures emerged. From the helicopter, a colonel whose bearing and equipment suggested special operations background, and a civilian wearing contractor clothing but moving with military precision. Both men carried themselves with the confident authority of people accustomed to operating in dangerous environments, and their immediate conference with Major Torres suggested that their visit involved matters of significant importance to the base's mission. Interesting timing, Sullivan observed, following Elena's gaze toward the helicopter. We don't usually get unscheduled VIP visits during media documentation projects. Elena agreed, though she kept her thoughts private as the media crew approached to continue their coverage of her integration with the medical team. The afternoon proceeded with additional interviews and documentation of routine medical procedures, but Elena remained conscious of the increased activity around the base that suggested preparations for something beyond normal operations. As evening approached, Elena found herself assigned to night duty in the medical facility, a responsibility that reflected her growing integration with the team's operational schedule. The base took on a different character after sunset, with reduced personnel movement and heightened security awareness that reminded everyone of their location in a contested area. The medical facility maintained constant readiness for emergency cases, though the night hours typically brought fewer routine medical issues. Elena used the quiet time to familiarize herself more thoroughly with the facility's advanced medical equipment, including some devices that exceeded what she had expected to find at a forward operating base. The surgical capabilities were particularly impressive, suggesting that the base might be prepared to handle more complex medical procedures than would normally be required for its stated mission as a logistics hub. Her secure phone buzzed again, with another message from Colonel Williams. Pay attention to everything. Trust your instincts. Be ready. Elena stared at the cryptic message, feeling increasingly certain that her assignment involved factors that extended beyond what anyone at the base had been told. The combination of her advanced medical training, the specialized equipment she had been authorized to bring, and the mysterious increase in activity around the base suggested that someone was preparing for situations that would require capabilities beyond standard forward operating base medical support. The night passed quietly, with only minor medical issues that Alina handled alongside Corporal Thompson, who was working the night shift as part of his regular rotation. Thompson's conversation provided insights into the base's typical operations and the personalities of key personnel, information that Alina filed away as part of her ongoing assessment of the facility and its mission. As her first week at FOB Sentinel concluded, Alina had established herself as a competent and valuable member of the medical team, earning respect from both officers and enlisted personnel through her professional performance rather than her symbolic importance to military diversity initiatives. The media crew continued their documentation, but Alina sensed that the story they were creating had evolved beyond simple coverage of female soldiers in combat support roles. More significantly, Alina had begun to notice patterns of activity around the base that suggested preparation for operations requiring enhanced medical capabilities. Equipment deliveries, personnel movements, and communication patterns all pointed toward something more substantial than the routine logistics mission FOB Sentinel was supposed to support. Alina's second week began with a briefing that confirmed some of her suspicions about the true nature of her assignment. Captain Mitchell called her into his office early Monday morning, accompanied by Major Torres and the mysterious colonel who had arrived by helicopter the previous week. The presence of senior officers and the security protocols surrounding the meeting suggested that Alina was about to learn information that would significantly change her understanding of her role at the base. Sergeant Vasquez, Major Torres began, "I need to brief you on some additional aspects of your assignment that weren't included in your original orders." Alina maintained her professional composure while internally preparing for information that might explain the discrepancies she had observed between her official assignment and the base's apparent preparations for enhanced operations. The colonel stepped forward, introducing himself as Colonel Marcus Stone from Joint Special Operations Command. His presence immediately elevated the significance of whatever Alina was about to learn, as JSOC involvement suggested operations at the highest levels of military capability and importance. "Sergeant," Colonel Stone said, "your assignment to this base wasn't just about media documentation. We needed someone with your level of medical training and position here without attracting attention to the real reason for your presence." Alina nodded, understanding that the media coverage had served as effective cover for placing advanced medical capabilities at FOB Sentinel without revealing the operational significance of that enhancement. "We have intelligence indicating that this region will soon become significantly more active," Major Torres continued. "Operations that will require medical support beyond what our standard team can provide. Your training and equipment represent insurance against casualty situations that could overwhelm conventional forward medical capabilities." Colonel Stone consulted a secure tablet before continuing. "Additionally, we're establishing this base as a support hub for operations that will involve personnel with specialized medical needs. Some of the teams we'll be supporting have exposure to experimental equipment and procedures that require medical personnel with your specific training background." Alina understood the implications immediately. Her experience with advanced trauma care and experimental medical procedures had positioned her to support special operations teams whose missions involved risks and requirements beyond conventional military medical protocols. The media documentation had provided perfect cover for placing these capabilities at FOB Sentinel without revealing the base's enhanced operational significance. "What do you need from me?" Alina asked, recognizing that her role was about to expand significantly beyond what she had originally understood. "Continue your current duties and maintain the cover of the media documentation project," Major Torres replied. but be prepared to transition immediately to advanced trauma support if situations develop. We may have very little warning before your specialized skills become critically important. Colonel Stone added a final element that confirmed Elena's growing suspicions about the complexity of her assignment. We also need you to serve as medical liaison for teams whose operations you won't be briefed on until they become operational. Your security clearance has been elevated to accommodate classified medical protocols that may be required on short notice. As the briefing concluded, Elena realized that her frustration with being assigned to what she had perceived as a publicity role had been based on incomplete information. Her presence at FOB Sentinel represented careful planning to position advanced medical capabilities where they would be needed for operations whose existence she was only now beginning to understand. The remainder of her second week proceeded with a new understanding of her actual mission. Though she continued to fulfill her official role supporting the media documentation project, Elena found herself paying closer attention to base activities and personnel movements, looking for signs of the enhanced operations that her briefing had suggested were approaching. Her opportunity to prove the value of her advanced training came sooner than anyone had expected, in circumstances that would test not only her medical skills, but also her ability to operate under extreme pressure in life or death situations. That would define her military career and change her relationship with everyone at FOB Sentinel forever. The convoy attack happened on a Tuesday morning when the desert air still held the coolness of night and the mountains on the horizon shimmered like mirages in the early light. Elena was conducting inventory in the medical supply room when the base's emergency alert system activated, filling the air with the urgent tone that meant incoming casualties. She had heard that sound during training exercises, but this was different. The pitch carried a note of genuine urgency that made every soldier on the base stop what they were doing and listen for additional information. Mass casualty event. Inbound came the announcement over the base's communication system. Multiple trauma patients. ETA 15 minutes. All medical personnel report to treatment facility immediately. Elena dropped her inventory checklist and grabbed her advanced trauma kit, the specialized medical bag that had drawn so much attention during her first week at FOB Sentinel. As she ran toward the medical facility, she could see other personnel moving with the coordinated urgency that characterized military emergency response. Vehicle crews were positioning ambulances and stretchers. Communications personnel were establishing contact with incoming medical evacuation aircraft, and security teams were preparing defensive positions in case the attack that had generated casualties was part of a larger coordinated assault. Captain Mitchell was already in the medical facility coordinating preparation when Elena arrived, his usual calm demeanor replaced by the focused intensity that emergency situations demanded. Master Sergeant Sullivan and the other medics were setting up triage areas and preparing surgical equipment, their movements reflecting the kind of practiced efficiency that came from extensive training and previous experience with combat casualties. "What's the situation?" Elena asked as she began setting up her specialized equipment alongside the standard trauma supplies. Convoy from Firebase Echo hit an improvised explosive device. Captain Mitchell replied, consulting reports coming in over secure radio channels. Initial reports indicate 5 casualties, at least 3 with serious trauma. 1 is listed as critical with potential spinal injuries. Elena felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that preceded serious medical challenges, the physiological response that sharpened her focus and accelerated her mental processing of treatment protocols. Her advanced training had prepared her for exactly these types of situations, though she had never been the primary medical responder for casualties of this severity at a forward operating base with limited surgical capabilities. The sound of approaching helicopters grew louder as the medical evacuation aircraft arrived ahead of schedule, their pilots having pushed their aircraft to maximum speed in response to the critical nature of the casualties. Elena could see the aircraft through the medical facility's windows, their rotors kicking up clouds of dust as they settled onto the landing pad, where ambulance crews waited to transfer patients as quickly as possible. "Incoming casualties," announced one of the ambulance crew members over the radio. "First patient is unconscious with suspected traumatic brain injury and possible internal bleeding. Second patient has multiple fractures and severe lacerations. Third patient appears stable but showing signs of shock." Elena positioned herself at the most advanced treatment station, the area equipped with monitoring equipment and surgical supplies that would be necessary for the most serious cases. Her specialized trauma training had taught her to mentally prepare for the worst possible scenarios, developing treatment plans for multiple contingencies based on the limited information available before patients arrived. The first ambulance crew burst through the facility doors, carrying a soldier whose injuries immediately confirmed the severity of the situation. The patient was unconscious, his uniform torn and bloodied, with obvious signs of blast trauma that suggested proximity to a powerful explosion. Elena's trained eye took in multiple indicators of serious internal injuries as the crew transferred him to her treatment station. "What's his status?" Elena asked as she began her systematic trauma assessment, her hands moving with practiced precision through the protocols that would determine the extent of his injuries and the urgency of required treatment. "Sergeant Michael Chun, age 24, reported the ambulance medic. "Lost consciousness approximately 20 minutes ago. Vitals have been declining steadily. Possible skull fracture, definite internal bleeding, and we're seeing signs of increasing intracranial pressure." Elena nodded as she connected monitoring equipment and began the advanced neurological assessment procedures that her specialized training had emphasized for exactly these types of head injuries. The readings immediately confirmed her worst fears about the patient's condition. Sergeant Chen was experiencing a traumatic brain injury with complications that could prove fatal without immediate intervention. "Captain Mitchell," Elena called out while continuing her assessment, "I need to perform an emergency cranial pressure relief procedure. This patient won't survive transport to a higher medical facility without immediate surgical intervention." Captain Mitchell looked up from the second casualty he was treating, his expression reflecting the complexity of the decision Elena was requesting. Emergency neurosurgical procedures at forward operating bases involved significant risks, particularly when performed by medical personnel who weren't specialized neurosurgeons. However, Elena's advanced training had included exactly these types of emergency interventions for situations where evacuation wasn't possible or wouldn't arrive in time. "Are you qualified for that procedure?" Captain Mitchell asked, the question reflecting both professional concern and recognition that Elena's training exceeded what he had initially understood about her capabilities. "Yes, sir," Elena replied without hesitation. "I completed advanced neurosurgical intervention training as part of the Special Operations Medical course. I've performed this procedure in simulation and supervised training environments." "Master." Sergeant Sullivan had moved to assist Elena, recognizing that the emergency procedure would require a coordinated team effort with precise timing and specialized equipment. His experience with combat casualties had taught him to recognize when situations exceeded conventional medical protocols and required personnel with advanced capabilities. "What do you need?" Sullivan asked, already anticipating the equipment and assistance that Elena would require for the complex procedure. Elena's mind shifted into the focused analytical mode that her training had developed for high-stress medical situations. The emergency cranial pressure relief procedure involved creating a small opening in the skull to relieve pressure from internal bleeding and swelling that threatened to cause permanent brain damage or death. The technique required precise anatomical knowledge, steady hands, and the ability to work quickly under extreme pressure. "I need the advanced surgical kit from my equipment bag, sterile field setup, and someone to monitor his vital signs continuously while I work," Elena replied, her voice carrying the calm authority that came from extensive training in emergency medical procedures. As Elena prepared for the procedure, she became aware that the media crew was documenting the entire emergency response, their cameras capturing her transition from documentation subject to primary medical responder in a life-threatening situation. The irony wasn't lost on her that the same media coverage that had initially seemed like a distraction from serious medical work was now recording her application of the advanced skills that had brought her to FOB Sentinel. The procedure required Elena to work with millimeter precision, while Sergeant Chun's life hung in the balance. Her hands steady despite the pressure of performing emergency neurosurgery in a forward medical facility that lacked the specialized equipment and controlled environment of a major medical center. Every movement had to be calculated and precise, as even small errors could result in permanent disability or death for her patient. "Intracranial pressure is dropping," Sullivan reported as Elena worked, his voice reflecting both relief and amazement at her technical skill under extreme pressure. "Vital signs are stabilizing." Elena continued the procedure with methodical precision, her training taking over as she navigated the complex anatomical structures that surrounded the injury site. The advanced trauma course had emphasized that successful emergency surgery required not just technical knowledge, but also the mental discipline to maintain focus when lives depended on perfect execution of complex medical procedures. 25 minutes later, Elena stepped back from the treatment table as Sergeant Chen's vital signs showed marked improvement, and his neurological responses indicated that the emergency intervention had successfully relieved the life-threatening pressure on his brain. The procedure had been successful, but Elena knew that the patient would require immediate evacuation to a major medical facility for follow-up surgery and extended neurological monitoring. "Outstanding work," Captain Mitchell said, his professional assessment reflecting genuine admiration for Elena's performance under pressure. "That was some of the most advanced field surgery I've ever witnessed. You potentially saved his life." Elena nodded while beginning post-procedure monitoring protocols, though her attention remained focused on ensuring that Sergeant Chun remained stable during the critical period following emergency surgery. Her training had emphasized that successful procedures were only meaningful if patients survived the transition to higher levels of medical care. The medical evacuation helicopter arrived as Elena was preparing Sergeant Chun for transport. The aircraft's crew, including a flight surgeon who would provide continuous medical monitoring during the journey to the regional medical center. Elena briefed the flight surgeon on the procedure she had performed and the patient's current condition, providing the detailed medical information that would be essential for continued treatment. "You performed emergency cranial decompression at a forward operating base?" the flight surgeon asked, his tone reflecting professional surprise at the advanced nature of the procedure. "What's your medical training background?" "Special Operations Medical Course graduate," Elena replied simply, watching as the flight crew prepared Sergeant Chun for transport. "Advanced Trauma Intervention Specialization." The flight surgeon nodded with newfound respect, understanding immediately that Elena's qualifications exceeded what would normally be expected at a conventional forward operating base. Special Operations Medical Course graduates were typically assigned to elite military units, where their advanced capabilities were essential for supporting high-risk missions in environments where conventional medical support wasn't available. As the medical evacuation helicopter departed with Sergeant Chun and the other casualties, Elena found herself surrounded by base personnel whose perception of her had been fundamentally altered by her performance during the emergency. The media crew that had been documenting her assignment as a diversity initiative now had footage of genuine life-saving medical intervention that demonstrated capabilities far beyond what anyone had expected. Major Torres approached Elena as she was cleaning and restocking her medical equipment, the routine maintenance that followed every significant medical procedure. The Major's expression reflected a new understanding of Elena's actual qualifications and the reasons for her assignment to FOB Sentinel. "Sergeant Vasquez," Major Torres said, "I think we need to have a more comprehensive discussion about your training and capabilities. What you just accomplished suggests that your assignment here involves factors that weren't fully explained in my initial briefings." Elena recognized the opportunity to provide more complete information about her background and the specialized training that had prepared her for situations like the one she had just handled. Her performance during the emergency had demonstrated that her presence at the base represented significant medical capabilities rather than just symbolic diversity representation. "Ma'am, my training includes advanced trauma surgery, emergency neurosurgical procedures, and specialized treatment protocols for combat casualties," Elena explained. "I'm qualified to perform medical interventions that exceed standard field medic capabilities, particularly in situations where evacuation to higher medical facilities isn't immediately available." Major Torres nodded thoughtfully, processing the implications of having such advanced medical capabilities at a forward operating base that had been configured for conventional logistic support operations. Elena's training suggested preparation for scenarios that exceeded the base's stated mission profile, indicating planning for operations that would require enhanced medical support. Master Sergeant Sullivan joined their conversation, his expression reflecting both professional admiration and curiosity about the circumstances that had brought Elena to FOB Sentinel. His years of experience with military medical operations had taught him to recognize when personnel assignments reflected strategic planning rather than routine rotation of medical staff. "Sergeant," Sullivan said, "that procedure you performed today isn't something most combat medics would attempt, even with ideal conditions and backup support. You handled it like you'd done it dozens of times before." Elena appreciated his professional recognition while understanding that her demonstration of advanced capabilities would inevitably lead to questions about her assignment and the reasons for placing such specialized medical training at a forward operating base. Her training had prepared her to work in high-stress environments, but it had also taught her to be discreet about operational security and the strategic planning that guided military medical assignments. "The Special Operations Medical Course emphasizes preparation for worst-case scenarios," Elena replied diplomatically. "Today's situation was exactly the type of emergency that the training is designed to address." Captain Mitchell approached the group as Elena finished her equipment maintenance, his expression reflecting a new understanding of her role at the base and the medical capabilities she represented. The morning's emergency had demonstrated that Elena's assignment involved genuine operational value rather than just political symbolism. "Sergeant," Captain Mitchell said, "I want to discuss expanding your responsibilities within our medical operations. Your performance today suggests that we've been underutilizing your capabilities since your arrival." Elena nodded, recognizing that the emergency had created opportunities to contribute more significantly to the base's medical mission. Her advanced training had always been intended for situations that exceeded conventional medical protocols, and the morning's events had demonstrated that such situations could arise with little warning at forward operating bases. The afternoon brought additional revelations about Elena's assignment when Colonel Stone returned to FOB Sentinel for an unscheduled briefing with the senior staff. His arrival suggested that the morning's emergency and Elena's response had accelerated whatever timeline had been established for operations requiring her specialized medical capabilities. Elena was called to attend the briefing, a clear indication that her role at the base had evolved beyond the documentation project that had provided cover for her initial assignment. The meeting took place in the base's secure conference facility, with communication links to higher headquarters and other military installations that suggested coordination of activities extending far beyond FOB Sentinel. "This morning's events have confirmed our assessment of Sergeant Vasquez's capabilities," Colonel Stone began, addressing the assembled officers and senior enlisted personnel. Her successful emergency intervention demonstrates the medical support level we'll need for upcoming operations in this region. Major Torres leaned forward, her expression reflecting growing understanding of the strategic factors that had guided Elena's assignment. Colonel, are you saying that Sergeant Vasquez was positioned here specifically in anticipation of medical emergencies that would exceed our standard capabilities? Among other factors, Colonel Stone confirmed. Intelligence reports indicate increasing activity in this region that will require medical support beyond conventional forward operating base capabilities. Sergeant Vasquez represents advanced trauma care resources that may become critical for supporting special operations and dealing with casualty situations involving experimental equipment or procedures. Elena listened to the briefing while understanding that her frustrations with being assigned to what appeared to be a publicity role had been based on incomplete information about the strategic planning behind her deployment. Her advanced medical training had been positioned at Phobe Sentinel as preparation for operations that were still developing, with the media documentation providing effective cover for placing specialized capabilities where they would be needed. Captain Mitchell raised a question that reflected concerns about the medical implications of enhanced operations. Colonel, if we're expecting casualties that require Sergeant Vasquez's level of intervention, what does that suggest about the risk profile of upcoming missions? Colonel Stone consulted his secure tablet before responding, his expression reflecting the seriousness of the information he was about to share. The operations we're planning involve technologies and procedures that carry inherent medical risks. Personnel working with certain experimental equipment may develop complications that require specialized treatment protocols. Additionally, the operational environment will likely generate trauma cases that exceed what conventional medical teams can handle. Elena understood immediately that her training in experimental medical procedures and advanced trauma care had positioned her to support military operations involving classified technologies and high-risk missions. Her assignment represented careful planning to ensure that medical capabilities matched the requirements of operations whose existence couldn't be publicly acknowledged. The briefing continued with discussion of enhanced security protocols and communication procedures that would govern Elena's expanded role at the base. Her security clearance elevation would provide access to classified medical information and treatment protocols that might be required for supporting personnel involved in operations she wouldn't be fully briefed on until they became active. As the meeting concluded, Elena realized that her assignment to FOB Sentinel represented a significant evolution in her military career, transitioning from frustrated medic seeking combat assignment to specialized medical support for operations at the highest levels of military capability and importance. The media documentation that had seemed like a distraction from serious medical work had actually provided perfect cover for positioning advanced medical capabilities where they would be needed for missions whose existence required careful operational security. The evening brought Elena's first briefing on the specialized medical protocols that would govern her expanded responsibilities at the base. Captain Mitchell and Colonel Stone provided information about experimental treatments and emergency procedures that went beyond even her advanced trauma training, representing the cutting edge of military medical technology and intervention techniques. Some of the personnel you may be treating have exposure to classified technologies that can cause medical complications not covered in conventional training, Colonel Stone explained, showing Elena technical manuals that contained medical information she had never encountered before. Your role includes serving as the primary medical resource for situations that require both advanced trauma care and specialized knowledge of experimental medical procedures. Elena studied the technical documentation with growing understanding of the complexity and importance of her assignment. The medical protocols described treatment procedures for conditions that could only arise from exposure to advanced military technologies, suggesting operations involving equipment and capabilities at the very limits of current military development. Captain Mitchell added information about the coordination requirements that would govern Elena's support for classified operations. You'll be working with medical personnel from other installations who have similar specialized training. Some situations may require consultation with experts at medical facilities that you won't be told the locations of. As Elena prepared for sleep that night, she reflected on how completely her understanding of her assignment had changed since arriving at FOB Sentinel. What had begun as frustration with being assigned to a documentation project had evolved into recognition that she was positioned to support operations representing the most advanced capabilities of the U.S. military. Her specialized medical training, rather than being wasted on publicity purposes, had been carefully placed where it would be essential for missions whose success might depend on having advanced medical support immediately available. The next morning brought the first test of Elena's new responsibilities when a helicopter arrived, carrying personnel whose medical needs immediately confirmed the specialized nature of her expanded role. The patients showed symptoms that Elena recognized from her briefing materials as complications from exposure to experimental military technologies, conditions that would have been completely mysterious to medical personnel without her specific training. Elena's treatment of these patients required application of the experimental medical protocols she had studied the previous evening, procedures that combined her advanced trauma training with specialized knowledge of how experimental technologies affected human physiology. The success of her interventions demonstrated that the planning behind her assignment had accurately anticipated the medical support requirements for operations involving classified capabilities. As word of Elena's expanding role spread through the base, her relationship with other personnel continued to evolve from skepticism about her presence to recognition of her essential contribution to the base's enhanced mission. The media crew found themselves documenting a story far more significant than military diversity initiatives, though the classified nature of much of Elena's work meant that the complete scope of her capabilities couldn't be publicly revealed. Master Sergeant Sullivan approached Elena as she completed her treatment of the specialized patients, his expression reflecting professional admiration, mixed with curiosity about the full extent of her training and responsibilities. "Sergeant," Sullivan said, "I've been working military medicine for 15 years, and I've never seen treatment protocols like what you just applied. Where did you learn procedures for those types of medical complications?" Elena appreciated his professional interest while understanding that much of her training remained classified and couldn't be discussed in detail even with fellow medical personnel. Specialized military medical programs cover a lot of scenarios that most people never encounter, she replied diplomatically. Today's cases were exactly the type of situation that the training prepares you for. Sullivan nodded thoughtfully, recognizing that Elena's assignment involved factors extending beyond what could be openly discussed. "Well, whatever the full story is, it's clear that having you here represents capabilities this base didn't have before. I'm glad you're on our team." As Elena's second week at FOB Sentinel concluded, she had established herself not just as a competent medic, but as an essential resource for operations requiring medical capabilities that exceeded conventional military medical support. Her transition from documentation subject to critical operational asset had demonstrated the value of advanced medical training and the importance of positioning specialized capabilities where they would be needed for missions at the cutting edge of military technology and operational requirements. The alarm that would change everything began as a low electronic pulse at 0347 hours, barely audible above the hum of the base's generators and climate control systems. Elena was reviewing classified medical protocols in the secure communications room when the sound penetrated her concentration. followed immediately by the base's emergency alert system activating with an intensity she had never heard before. This wasn't the standard alert for incoming casualties or routine security threats. The sustained tone carried a note of absolute urgency that sent every person on Phobe Sentinel into immediate action. Code Black, came the announcement. Over the base's communication system, the words delivered with clipped precision that barely contained underlying tension. All personnel to emergency stations. This is not a drill. Command staff to Tactical Operations Center immediately. Elena had memorized the base's emergency codes during her orientation, but Code Black was one she had hoped never to hear. It indicated an imminent attack on the base itself, with enemy forces close enough to pose immediate threat to all personnel and facilities. The classification meant that the attack involved capabilities or tactics that exceeded normal threat assessments, requiring responses beyond standard defensive protocols. She grabbed her medical kit and the specialized equipment that had been positioned for emergency deployment, moving toward the medical facility with the controlled urgency that her training had ingrained for crisis situations. Around her, the base transformed into a coordinated defensive position as personnel implemented procedures that had been drilled countless times but never executed under actual attack conditions. The Tactical Operations Center buzzed with activity as officers coordinated defensive responses and communication with higher headquarters. Elena could see Major Torres directing security teams to reinforced positions while Captain Mitchell prepared the medical facility for mass casualty reception. The coordination was impressive, but the tension in everyone's movements suggested that this situation exceeded anything they had encountered during previous deployments. Sergeant Vasquez report. To Colonel Stone immediately, came a voice over her personal communication device. The urgency in the tone suggested that her specialized medical capabilities were about to become critically important in ways that extended beyond treating routine combat casualties. Elena found Colonel Stone in the secure command bunker beneath the Tactical Operations Center, surrounded by communication equipment and personnel who were coordinating with agencies and installations that she couldn't identify. His expression when he saw her reflected both relief at her immediate availability and concern about the situation that had generated the emergency alert. "Sergeant," Colonel Stone said without preamble, "we have a situation that requires your specialized medical capabilities under extreme circumstances. An experimental aircraft conducting classified operations has crashed approximately 8 kilometers from this base. The pilot is alive but trapped in wreckage that contains technology and materials that pose significant hazards to rescue personnel." Elena nodded, understanding immediately that this was exactly the type of scenario that had driven her assignment to FOB Sentinel. Her training in experimental medical procedures and hazardous material exposure protocols had prepared her for situations where conventional rescue and medical procedures would be inadequate or dangerous. "What's the nature of the hazards?" Elena asked, already mentally reviewing the specialized protocols she had studied for dealing with casualties involving classified technologies. Colonel Stone consulted a secure tablet displaying information that Elena couldn't see from her position. The aircraft was testing quantum propulsion technology that generates radiation signatures unlike anything in conventional military inventory. Additionally, the pilot has been exposed to experimental neural interface systems that could cause medical complications, requiring your specific training to address. Elena felt her pulse quicken as she recognized the implications of what Colonel Stone was describing. Quantum propulsion systems and neural interface technology represented the cutting edge of military aviation development, but both carried inherent risks that required specialized medical knowledge to address safely. Her assignment to FOB Sentinel had positioned her to respond to exactly these types of emergencies, though she had hoped such situations would remain theoretical. The rescue operation requires medical personnel who can function in a contaminated environment while providing treatment for injuries and exposures that conventional medics wouldn't recognize, Colonel Stone continued. You're the only person within 300 kilometers with the training necessary to keep this pilot alive during extraction and treatment. Elena understood that the situation involved not just medical challenges, but also operational security requirements that would complicate every aspect of the rescue mission. Experimental aircraft crashes involved classified technologies that had to be protected even during emergency operations, requiring specialized protocols that balanced life-saving medical care with security considerations. What's the timeline for the rescue operation? Elena asked, calculating the preparation time needed for operating in a contaminated environment while providing advanced medical care under combat conditions. Colonel Stone's expression grew more serious as he checked his communication equipment for updates from the crash site. Intelligence reports indicate that hostile forces are moving toward the crash location. We have a narrow window to extract the pilot and secure any recoverable technology before enemy forces arrive. The rescue operation launches in 30 minutes. Elena felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that accompanied high-stakes medical missions, but this situation exceeded anything she had experienced during her training or previous deployments. The combination of experimental technology hazards, combat conditions, and time pressure created challenges that would test every aspect of her specialized medical capabilities. I need access to the experimental medical protocols for quantum radiation exposure and neural interface complications, Elena said, understanding that treating casualties from experimental aircraft would require procedures beyond even her advanced training. Colonel Stone nodded and handed her a secure tablet containing classified medical information that she had been cleared to access only in emergency situations. The protocols described treatment procedures for conditions that could only arise from exposure to technologies at the very limits of current military development, representing medical knowledge that existed nowhere in conventional medical literature. Elena studied the information rapidly, absorbing treatment procedures for radiation exposure from quantum propulsion systems and medical complications from experimental neural interfaces. The protocols combined elements of her advanced trauma training with specialized knowledge of how classified technologies affected human physiology, requiring her to integrate conventional medical procedures with experimental treatment methods. The rescue team consists of special operations personnel trained for hazardous material recovery operations, Colonel Stone explained as Elena prepared her specialized medical equipment. You'll be the primary medical authority for all decisions regarding the pilot's treatment and extraction procedures. Elena nodded while organizing medical supplies that included both conventional trauma care equipment and specialized materials for treating exposure to experimental technologies. Her medical kit had been configured specifically for these types of emergencies, containing equipment and pharmaceuticals that most military medics had never seen. The special operations team that would conduct the rescue operation assembled in the base's secure staging area, their equipment reflecting preparation for missions involving classified technologies and extreme hazards. Elena recognized their gear as designed for operating in contaminated environments while maintaining combat effectiveness, the kind of specialized capability that supported operations at the highest levels of military classification. The team leader, a master sergeant whose name tag read Hawkins, briefed Elena on the tactical aspects of the rescue operation while she prepared her medical equipment for deployment in hazardous conditions. His manner reflected both professional competence and recognition that her medical expertise would be essential for mission success. The crash site is located in terrain that provides some concealment from aerial observation, but ground approaches are limited to 2 routes that we'll have to secure beginning extraction operations, Hawkins explained, showing Elena tactical maps that displayed the operational environment they would be entering. Elena studied the terrain while considering the medical challenges of providing advanced trauma care in an unsecured environment with limited time and resources. Her training had emphasized that successful emergency medicine under combat conditions required not just medical knowledge, but also tactical awareness and the ability to adapt procedures to operational constraints. What's the pilot's current condition based on initial reconnaissance? Elena asked, needing medical information to plan treatment procedures that could be implemented immediately upon reaching the crash site. Hawkins consulted communication updates from advance reconnaissance teams that were monitoring the situation from concealed positions. The pilot is conscious and responding to radio contact, but reporting severe headaches, disorientation, and vision problems that suggest complications from neural interface exposure. Additionally, there are signs of radiation burns and possible internal injuries from the crash impact. Elena recognized the symptoms as consistent with the experimental medical complications she had studied in her classified protocols. Neural interface exposure could cause neurological effects that ranged from temporary disorientation to permanent brain damage, while radiation from quantum propulsion systems posed risks that required immediate medical intervention to prevent long-term health consequences. I'll need to establish direct communication with the pilot to conduct preliminary medical assessment before we reach the crash site, Elena said, understanding that remote medical evaluation would be essential for planning treatment procedures that could be implemented under field conditions. The communication link with the pilot was established through encrypted channels that protected both his identity and any classified information he might inadvertently reveal while discussing his medical condition. Elena's first conversation with the injured pilot confirmed her assessment that his symptoms indicated serious complications from exposure to experimental technologies. "This is the medical officer for your extraction team," Elena said, speaking into the secure communication system. "I need you to describe your symptoms in detail so I can prepare appropriate treatment procedures." The pilot's voice reflected both pain and the kind of professional discipline that characterized special operations personnel even under extreme stress. "The headaches started about 20 minutes after the crash and have been increasing in intensity. My vision is blurred and I'm experiencing what feels like electrical sensations throughout my nervous system." Elena recognized the symptoms as classic indicators of neural interface overload, a condition that could cause permanent neurological damage without prompt treatment using the specialized protocols she had studied. The electrical sensation suggested that the experimental neural interface system was continuing to affect his nervous system even after the aircraft had crashed. "Are you experiencing any nausea, dizziness, or loss of coordination?" Elena asked, gathering information needed to assess the severity of his neural interface exposure and plan treatment procedures accordingly. "All of the above," the pilot replied, his voice showing strain from the effort of maintaining clear communication despite his medical condition. "The nausea started first, followed by dizziness that makes it difficult to maintain orientation even while sitting still." Elena's medical assessment confirmed that the pilot was experiencing severe neural interface complications that would require immediate intervention using experimental treatment protocols. Additionally, his reported symptoms suggested possible radiation exposure from the quantum propulsion system, creating a complex medical situation that would challenge every aspect of her specialized training. The rescue helicopter lifted off from FOB Sentinel exactly 30 minutes after the initial alert, carrying Elena and the special operations team toward a crash site that represented both a medical emergency and a potential intelligence disaster. If hostile forces reached the experimental aircraft before the rescue operation could secure it, Elena used the flight time to review treatment procedures and organize medical equipment for deployment in a contaminated environment under combat conditions. The landscape below them reflected the harsh beauty of the Afghan mountains terrain that had challenged military operations for centuries and continued to pose operational difficulties for modern forces despite Advanced technology and equipment. Elena could see the crash site ahead, marked by a column of smoke that suggested fires still burning within the experimental aircraft's wreckage. 3 minutes to insertion, announced the helicopter pilot over the internal communication system. Initial reconnaissance reports no immediate enemy activity, but intelligence indicates hostile forces approximately 20 minutes away from the crash location. Elena checked her specialized medical equipment one final time, ensuring that everything needed for treating experimental technology exposure was organized for immediate deployment. The rescue operation would require her to function as both primary medical officer and hazardous materials specialist, roles that demanded different types of expertise working in perfect coordination. The helicopter settled into a landing zone. Approximately 200 meters from the crash site, the aircraft's rotor wash kicking up clouds of dust that provided temporary concealment for the rescue team's deployment. Elena followed the special operations personnel as they moved toward the experimental aircraft using tactical movement procedures designed to minimize exposure to potential enemy observation or fire. The crashed aircraft was unlike anything Elena had seen before, its design reflecting technologies that existed nowhere in conventional military inventory. The fuselage showed signs of catastrophic structural failure, but much of the experimental equipment appeared intact, suggesting that the pilot's survival was miraculous given the severity of the crash impact. Elena could see the pilot through the aircraft's shattered canopy, a figure in a specialized flight suit that incorporated equipment she recognized as part of the neural interface system. His position in the cockpit suggested spinal injuries in addition to the neural interface complications he had reported, creating a complex medical situation that would require careful coordination of treatment procedures. Medical assessment is my first priority, Elena announced to the rescue team as they approached the aircraft. I need to evaluate his condition and begin treatment procedures before we attempt extraction. Master Sergeant Hawkins nodded while positioning his team to provide security around the crash site. We've got approximately 15 minutes before hostile forces reach this location. Can you stabilize him for extraction within that time frame? Elena was already moving toward the pilot, her medical training taking over as she assessed the immediate challenges of providing advanced trauma care in a contaminated environment with limited time and resources. The combination of neural interface complications, possible spinal injuries, and radiation exposure created medical requirements that exceeded anything she had encountered during training exercises. I'm the medical officer for your extraction team, Elena said to the pilot as she reached the aircraft, speaking clearly despite the urgency of the situation. I'm going to assess your condition and begin treatment procedures to prepare you for extraction. The pilot's eyes focused on her with difficulty, his pupils showing the dilation and irregular response that Elena recognized as symptoms of severe neural interface exposure. The interface system won't disconnect, he said, his voice reflecting both pain and frustration. It's still trying to sync with aircraft systems that no longer exist. Elena understood immediately that the experimental neural interface was continuing to send signals to the pilot's nervous system despite the aircraft's destruction, creating a feedback loop that could cause permanent brain damage without immediate intervention. Her specialized training had covered exactly this type of emergency, though she had never expected to apply the procedures under field conditions. I'm going to begin emergency disconnection procedures, Elena explained while accessing specialized medical equipment designed specifically for neural interface emergencies. This will involve some discomfort, but it's necessary to prevent permanent neurological damage. The experimental medical protocols for neural interface disconnection required Elena to work with equipment that most military medics had never seen, devices that could safely interrupt the connection between human nervous systems and experimental technology without causing additional damage to the patient. The procedure was complex under ideal conditions and would be challenging to perform in a contaminated crash site with hostile forces approaching. Elena began the disconnection sequence while monitoring the pilot's neurological responses, her hands moving with practiced precision through procedures that combined her advanced medical training with specialized knowledge of experimental military technology. Each step required careful attention to both medical protocols and the timing constraints imposed by the tactical situation. Neural interface disconnection proceeding normally, Elena reported to the rescue team while continuing the complex medical procedure. I'm seeing improvement in his neurological responses, but we still need to address potential spinal injuries and radiation exposure. The pilot's expression showed immediate relief as the experimental neural interface system was safely disconnected, ending the painful feedback loop that had been affecting his nervous system since the crash. However, Elena's medical assessment revealed additional complications that would require continued treatment during the extraction operation. "I can feel my arms and legs," the pilot said, his voice stronger now that the neural interface complications were being addressed. "But there's significant pain in my back and chest that suggests internal injuries." Elena nodded while beginning assessment procedures for spinal trauma and internal bleeding, medical evaluations that were complicated by the need to work within the aircraft's damaged cockpit while wearing protective equipment designed for operating in contaminated environments. Her training had emphasized the importance of systematic medical assessment, even under extreme time pressure. "We're going to immobilize your spine before extraction," Elena explained while preparing specialized equipment for dealing with spinal injuries under field conditions. "This will prevent additional damage during the movement to the extraction helicopter." The spinal immobilization procedure required Elena to work with equipment designed specifically for extracting injured personnel from damaged aircraft, tools that allowed for safe movement of patients with potential spinal injuries while minimizing additional trauma. The process was complicated by the specialized flight suit and neural interface equipment that the pilot was wearing. "Hostile forces now 15 minutes away," Master Sergeant Hawkins reported while maintaining security around the crash site. "Medical, what's your status for extraction readiness?" Elena was completing the spinal immobilization procedures while simultaneously monitoring the pilot for signs of internal bleeding or radiation exposure complications. 5 minutes for medical stabilization, then ready for extraction," she replied, calculating the time needed to prepare the pilot for safe movement to the rescue helicopter. The final phase of Elena's emergency medical treatment involved administering specialized pharmaceuticals designed to counteract radiation exposure from quantum propulsion systems, medications that existed nowhere in conventional medical inventories. The pilot's exposure levels required immediate intervention to prevent long-term health consequences that could prove more serious than his immediate injuries. "This injection will help neutralize radiation exposure," Elena explained while preparing the experimental medication. "You may experience some temporary disorientation, but it's necessary to prevent long-term complications from quantum radiation." The pilot nodded his understanding while Elena administered the specialized treatment, her hands steady despite the pressure of working under combat conditions with experimental medical procedures. Her training had prepared her for exactly these types of situations, though the reality of applying experimental medical protocols in a hostile environment exceeded anything she had experienced during simulation exercises. "Medical treatment complete," Elena announced to the rescue team. "Patient is stabilized and ready for extraction." The extraction operation required coordinated movement of the injured pilot from the aircraft, wreckage to the rescue helicopter while maintaining medical monitoring and protection from potential enemy fire. Elena accompanied the pilot throughout the movement, providing continuous medical assessment and treatment as needed during the tactical withdrawal from the crash site. The rescue helicopter was already spinning up for immediate departure as the extraction team reached the landing zone, its crew prepared for rapid medical evacuation under potential combat conditions. Elena transferred her patient to the aircraft's medical station while providing detailed briefing to the flight medic about the specialized treatments that had been administered. Patient has been treated for neural interface exposure, spinal trauma, and quantum radiation poisoning, Elena reported while connecting monitoring equipment that would provide continuous medical assessment during the flight back to FOB Sentinel. He'll require continued specialized medical care and monitoring for experimental technology exposure. The helicopter lifted off from the crash site, just as intelligence reports confirmed that hostile forces were approaching the location. Their arrival timing that would have resulted in capture or death for the experimental aircraft pilot without the successful rescue operation. Elena continued medical monitoring during the flight, ensuring that her patient remained stable and that the experimental treatments were producing the intended results. The successful extraction of the pilot represented validation of Elena's specialized medical training and the strategic planning that had positioned her at FOB Sentinel for exactly these types of emergencies. Her ability to provide advanced medical care for experimental technology exposure had made the difference between mission success and potential intelligence disaster for military operations involving classified capabilities. As the rescue helicopter approached FOB Sentinel, Elena reflected on how completely the mission had demonstrated the value of her advanced medical training and the importance of positioning specialized capabilities where they would be needed for operations at the cutting edge of military technology. The emergency had required every aspect of her experimental medical training, proving that her assignment represented genuine operational requirements rather than symbolic diversity initiatives. The pilot's condition continued to improve during the flight as the specialized treatments took effect, his neurological responses returning to normal and his vital signs stabilizing within acceptable ranges. Elena's successful application of experimental medical protocols under extreme field conditions had prevented permanent disability or death from exposure to technologies that existed nowhere in conventional military medical training. The landing at FOB Sentinel brought the rescue operation full circle, with the experimental aircraft pilot being transferred to the base's medical facility for continued specialized care and monitoring. Elena's role as the primary medical authority for experimental technology exposure had been established through her successful treatment of complications that would have been fatal without her specific training and capabilities. Colonel Stone met the rescue helicopter as it landed, his expression reflecting both relief at the mission's success and recognition of Elena's critical contribution to saving the pilot's life. The rescue operation had demonstrated that her assignment to FOB Sentinel represented essential medical capabilities for supporting operations involving experimental military technologies. "Outstanding work, Sergeant," Colonel Stone said as Elena transferred her patient to the base's medical facility. "Your medical intervention saved not just his life, but also prevented potential intelligence compromises that could have affected national security." Elena nodded while ensuring that the pilot received appropriate follow-up care for his experimental technology exposure, understanding that her specialized medical training had proven its value in circumstances that justified every aspect of her advanced education and assignment to forward operating positions. The mission represented the culmination of years of training for medical emergencies that most military personnel would never encounter. The pilot's recovery proceeded according to the experimental medical protocols Elena had applied, confirming that her treatment decisions had been appropriate for the complex medical situation created by exposure to classified technologies. His neurological functions returned to normal within hours, and medical monitoring showed no signs of permanent damage from either the neural interface complications or radiation exposure. Master Sergeant Hawkins approached Elena as she completed her medical documentation of the rescue mission, his expression reflecting professional admiration for her performance under extreme conditions. "Sergeant, that was some of the most impressive medical work I've seen in 15 years of special operations," Your training made the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Elena appreciated his recognition while understanding that the successful rescue represented validation of the strategic thinking that had positioned advanced medical capabilities at forward operating bases, supporting experimental military operations. Her specialized training had proven essential for missions that required medical support beyond conventional military protocols. The aftermath of the rescue mission brought Elena recognition from military leadership at levels extending far beyond Phobe Sentinel, with commendation messages from agencies and installations whose existence she hadn't been aware of before her deployment. Her successful application of experimental medical procedures under combat conditions had demonstrated capabilities that would reshape how the military approached medical support for operations involving classified technologies. Captain Mitchell approached Elena as she reviewed the medical outcomes from the rescue mission, his expression reflecting newfound understanding of the strategic importance of her assignment to the base. Sergeant, what you accomplished today represents medical capabilities that most of us didn't realize existed. Your training and equipment saved a life that conventional medical procedures couldn't have helped. Elena nodded while considering the broader implications of the mission for her military career and future assignments. The successful rescue had established her reputation as a medical specialist, capable of supporting operations at the highest levels of military capability, opening possibilities for assignments that would utilize her full range of advanced training and expertise. The experimental aircraft pilot approached Elena during his recovery period, his expression reflecting both gratitude for her life-saving medical intervention and professional respect for her capabilities under extreme conditions. I wanted to thank you personally for what you did out there. The medical complications from the neural interface would have killed me without your specialized treatment. Elena appreciated his recognition while understanding that the rescue mission represented successful application of medical training that had been developed specifically for supporting military operations involving experimental technologies. Her ability to provide advanced medical care under combat conditions had validated years of specialized education and preparation for emergencies that most military personnel would never encounter. The media crew that had originally been documenting Elena's assignment as a diversity initiative found themselves recording a story that demonstrated genuine military capabilities rather than symbolic representation. Her transition from documentation subject to mission-critical medical specialist had created a narrative that emphasized professional competence and specialized training over political considerations. As Elena's assignment at Phobe Sentinel entered its final phase, she had established herself as an essential resource for operations requiring medical support beyond conventional military capabilities. Her successful application of experimental medical procedures under extreme conditions had proven that her advanced training represented genuine operational value for missions at the cutting edge of military technology and capability. 6 months after the experimental aircraft rescue, Elena stood before a packed auditorium at the Pentagon, addressing an audience of military leadership, defense contractors, and medical professionals who had gathered to hear about the revolutionary changes in combat medical protocols that had emerged from her experiences at Phobe Sentinel. The woman who had once been dismissed as a diversity photo opportunity was now recognized as the architect of advanced field medicine integration within special operations, the integration of experimental medical capabilities with forward deployed special operations represents a fundamental shift in how we approach casualty care in classified environments, Elena said, her voice carrying the confident authority that came from having proven her expertise under the most extreme conditions imaginable. What we learned is that advanced medical training isn't just about saving lives. It's about enabling missions that were previously impossible due to medical risk factors. The audience included General Patricia Hayes, who had replaced the previous Joint Chiefs Medical advisor specifically to oversee the implementation of Elena's recommended protocols across all Special Operations Commands. The general's presence reflected the institutional changes that Elena's successful rescue mission had catalyzed throughout the military medical establishment. Elena's presentation detailed the new training programs that had been established at 3 specialized medical facilities, institutions that now produced medics capable of supporting operations involving experimental technologies and classified capabilities. Her rescue of the experimental aircraft pilot had demonstrated critical gaps in conventional medical support that threatened mission success and personnel survival in advanced operational environments. Traditional field medicine assumes conventional injuries and standard treatment protocols. Elena continued, using presentation slides that showed without revealing classified information, how experimental technology exposure created medical challenges that exceeded conventional training. Operations involving quantum propulsion, neural interface systems, and other advanced technologies require medical personnel who understand both the capabilities and the risks associated with cutting-edge military equipment. Dr. Sarah Chen, the Pentagon's senior medical research coordinator, approached Elena after the presentation with enthusiasm that reflected the broader institutional recognition of her contributions to military medicine. Sergeant Vasquez, your protocols are being adopted by NATO allies and integrated into medical training programs at levels we never anticipated when this initiative began. Elena nodded while reflecting on how completely her career trajectory had changed since arriving at FOB Sentinel for what she had believed was a documentation assignment. The specialized medical training that had once seemed wasted on publicity purposes had become the foundation for transforming how the military approached medical support for its most advanced operations. Master Sergeant Derek Sullivan, who had been promoted to oversee medical training integration at the Special Operations Medical Course, joined their conversation with news that confirmed Elena's expanding influence within military medical education. We've got a waiting list of 200 medics requesting advanced technology exposure training, he reported. Your rescue mission created demand for capabilities that most people didn't know existed. The conversation was interrupted by Colonel Marcus Stone, whose own career had been enhanced by the successful integration of experimental medical support into classified operations. His presence at the Pentagon reflected the institutional changes that Elena's demonstration of advanced medical capabilities had generated throughout the special operations community. Sergeant, Colonel Stone said, I have an offer that represents the next evolution of your career and the programs you've helped establish. The Department of Defense is creating a new position, Director of Advanced Medical Integration for Special Operations. The job requires someone with your unique combination of field experience, experimental medical training, and institutional credibility. Elena considered the offer while understanding that accepting the position would represent a fundamental transition from field medicine to program leadership, though it would also provide opportunities to shape the future of military medical capabilities at the highest levels of defense planning. Her experiences at FOB Sentinel had demonstrated that advanced medical support could enable missions that were previously impossible due to medical risk factors. The position comes with immediate promotion to warrant officer and authority to establish medical protocols for any operation involving experimental technologies, Colonel Stone continued. You'd be responsible for ensuring that medical capabilities match operational requirements for missions at the cutting edge of military capability. Elena's decision reflected both personal ambition and commitment to ensuring that other military medical personnel had access to the training and resources needed to support advanced operations. Her rescue of the experimental aircraft pilot had proven that specialized medical capabilities could make the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure in classified environments. 3 months later, Elena's new office at the Pentagon reflected her transformation from field medic to institutional leader. with secure communication systems connecting her to medical personnel at forward operating bases around the world. Her responsibilities included oversight of medical support for operations that she couldn't discuss even with family members, missions that required medical capabilities at the very limits of current knowledge and technology. The experimental aircraft pilot she had rescued, now fully recovered and returned to flight status, visited Elena's office to discuss medical protocols for new aircraft systems that incorporated even more advanced neural interface technology. Their professional relationship had evolved into collaboration on ensuring that medical support kept pace with rapidly advancing military capabilities. The new systems we're testing push neural interface integration beyond anything we've attempted before, the pilot explained, showing Elena classified specifications for aircraft that represented the next generation of human-machine integration. We need medical protocols that can handle complications we haven't even discovered yet. Elena studied the technical documentation while considering the medical implications of technologies that exceeded even her advanced training. Her role as Director of Advanced Medical Integration required her to anticipate medical challenges. For systems that existed only as prototypes, developing treatment protocols for conditions that might never occur but could prove fatal without proper preparation. The secure video conference that afternoon connected Elena with medical personnel. At 12 different installations, a regular briefing that coordinated advanced medical support for classified operations worldwide. Her recommendations influenced medical planning for missions that ranged from special operations to experimental technology testing, ensuring that medical capabilities matched operational requirements regardless of classification level. We've had 3 successful applications of quantum radiation exposure protocols this month, reported Dr. James Mitchell from a classified research facility whose location Elena wasn't authorized to know. Your treatment guidelines are proving effective for exposure levels that would have been fatal without immediate intervention. Elena nodded while reviewing reports from medical personnel who were applying protocols she had developed based on her experiences treating experimental technology complications. Her rescue mission at FOB Sentinel had generated medical knowledge that was now saving lives in situations that occurred more frequently than anyone had anticipated when the programs were established. The afternoon brought a secure communication from General Hayes with news that would represent the culmination of Elena's transformation from field medic to institutional leader. Sergeant, Warrant Officer Vasquez, the Secretary of Defense has approved your recommendation for establishing the Advanced Medical Integration Command. You'll be promoted to Chief Warrant Officer and given authority to coordinate medical support for all operations involving experimental technologies. Elena understood that the new command represented institutional recognition that advanced medical capabilities had become essential for military operations at the highest levels of technological sophistication. Her demonstration that specialized medical training could enable previously impossible missions had created demand for capabilities that required dedicated institutional support. The establishment of the Advanced Medical Integration Command 6 months later brought Elena full circle from her arrival at FOB Sentinel as a reluctant participant in what she had believed was a publicity stunt. The command facility included training centers, research laboratories, and communication systems that coordinated advanced medical support for classified operations worldwide. Elena's final reflection on her journey from skeptical field medic to institutional leader emphasized the importance of recognizing that capabilities, initially dismissed as symbolic, could prove essential for missions that define national security. At the highest levels, her transformation demonstrated that professional competence and institutional change could emerge from circumstances that initially appeared to represent political considerations rather than operational requirements. The experimental aircraft pilot she had rescued sent a brief message that captured the broader significance of Elena's contributions to military medical capabilities. Your medical intervention didn't just save my life, it proved that we could push technological boundaries because we had medical support that matched our operational ambitions. Elena's legacy extended beyond individual rescue missions to institutional changes that would influence military medical capabilities for decades, ensuring that advanced medical training would be available wherever operations required capabilities. At the cutting edge of human and technological integration, her transformation from photo opportunity to program architect demonstrated that excellence could emerge from any circumstance when professional competence met institutional opportunity. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.